They thought firing me 23 hours before my massive equity bonus vested would save the company millions. They didn't realize I had buried a poison pill clause in my contract years ago. One signature triggered a trap that wouldn't just pay me double, it would cost them everything. This is where the story truly begins, and trust me, the fallout is absolutely delicious. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the details. We're always curious. Have you ever had a boss try to pull a fast one on you? Let us know in the comments. I knew something was fundamentally wrong the second I stepped into the lobby. It wasn't a noise, it was the absence of one. Usually, the receptionist, a bright young woman named Jessica who prided herself on knowing everyone's coffee order, would greet me with a wave and a smile. Today, she wouldn't even meet my eyes. Her head was bowed low over her desk, her posture rigid, as if her pupils were magnetically glued to a hairline crack in the polished marble floor. She was typing furiously at a keyboard that wasn't plugged in. I hadn't even set my purse down on the security scanner when my phone vibrated against my hip. It wasn't a casual buzz. It was the sharp, insistent double tap of an Outlook priority notification. I pulled it out. The screen was bright against the dim morning light of the atrium. Urgent performance review. 9:15 a.m. Conf RM4C. Subject line in all caps, no body text, no courteous sign-off, no signature, just a cold digital summons. Cute, I whispered to myself, though my stomach gave a lurch that betrayed my cynical tone. Let me set the stage here so you understand the gravity of that notification. I wasn't some junior analyst struggling to hit KPIs. I was the vice president of strategic growth for Arcshire Financial. I had just wrapped 12 consecutive quarters of double-digit growth. 12. In this economy, that wasn't just good, it was miraculous. We had landed the Hastings account, a whale of a client, barely 3 weeks prior. That deal alone was projected to bring in $28 million in revenue over the next 3 years. I had built that deal from nothing. I had sketched the initial framework on a cocktail napkin during a turbulent Delta flight while the rest of the team was sleeping. I had courted the Hastings board for 6 months, missing birthdays, anniversaries, and sleep. I was the one who smoothed over the regulatory hurdles. I was the one who shook the hands. But now, suddenly, I was getting ghost texted into a last-minute meeting 15 minutes after arriving, like I was about to be scolded for stealing someone's yogurt from the break room fridge. When you have worked in high-stakes finance as long as I have, you develop a sixth sense. It's a psychic tickle at the base of your spine, a primal warning system that activates when the wind changes direction. It tells you when a deal is going south, when a partner is lying, and when you are no longer the hunter, but the prey. And right now, standing in that silent lobby with the receptionist refusing to look at me, my spine was screaming. The air tasted stale, recycled, and heavy with secrets. I looked at the elevator bank. The doors slid open with a cheerful ding that felt mocking. I stepped inside, pressed the button for the executive floor, and watched the numbers climb. The silence in the lobby wasn't just awkward. It was the sound of a guillotine blade being hoisted into place, waiting for gravity to do its work. I took the long way to my office. This wasn't out of fear. I don't do fear in the workplace, but out of strategy. I needed time to breathe, to calibrate my mask, and to scan the halls. I needed to clock exactly who was avoiding me. It was subtle, but to a trained eye, it was as obvious as a neon sign. I passed the break room. A group of junior associates abruptly stopped talking as I walked by. One guy, a promising analyst I had mentored for 5 years, a kid whose letter of recommendation for business school I was currently writing, literally ducked into the copy room to avoid saying good morning. He pretended to be fascinated by the toner levels of a machine that wasn't even running. That's when I knew this wasn't a reprimand, it wasn't a performance review. It was an execution. I passed Karen's office. Her door was cracked open just an inch. Karen was the VP of Human Resources, a woman who wore empathy like a cheap scarf, decorative, but offering no actual warmth. I heard her whispering to someone on the phone. She was using that specific tone, a fake sympathy lilt that she deployed exclusively when she was firing interns or cutting benefits. It was the same saccharine voice she had used when she told Jenny from accounting that her role had evolved beyond her scope, which is corporate speak for "we gave your job to a 22-year-old with a ring light and a stepfather on the board." "It's just policy, Brian. I know, it'll be quick," Karen whispered. I didn't stop. I kept walking, my heels clicking a steady, rhythmic beat on the hardwood hallway. Click, 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 like a countdown. I slipped into my office and closed the door. I didn't turn on the lights. The morning sun sliced through the blinds, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, the only things in this building that were truly free. I went straight to my desk, but I didn't log into my computer. Instead, I unlocked the bottom drawer of my mahogany file cabinet. Buried beneath a stack of old quarterly reports and compliance manuals was a slim, leather-bound portfolio. I opened it. Inside was my original employment contract. It was 8 pages of dense legalese, printed on heavy, cream-colored paper. I flipped past the standard non-competes and the confidentiality agreements. I flipped past the salary tables and the benefit schedules. I stopped at page 7. Clause 11C. I read it, I reread it. I ran my finger over the text, feeling the slight indentation where the laser printer had burned the ink into the page. Then, my finger traced the initials in the margin. K.M. Karen Miller, B.S. Brian Stevenson, V.O. Victoria Owens. They were still there. Blue ink, slightly faded after 3 years, but legally indelible. This clause was my parachute, my kill switch, my insurance policy against exactly the kind of amateur-hour screw job I was about to walk into. I remembered the day I negotiated it. I was recovering from pneumonia, dialed into a conference call from a hospital bed, feeling vulnerable and mortal. I had realized then that loyalty in this business is a currency that devalues the moment you stop generating profit. So, I had insisted on clause 11C. Brian had laughed at the time. "You're so paranoid, Victoria," he'd said, swirling his scotch. "It's just standard retention language, whatever makes you happy." "Whatever makes me happy," I whispered to the empty room. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I don't negotiate for happiness. I negotiate for leverage. I folded the papers carefully and slid them into my sleek, black leather portfolio. I stood up, adjusted my blazer, and checked my reflection in the darkened monitor of my computer. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. I smiled into the mirror just once. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone holding a royal flush while watching their opponent bet the deed to their house on a pair of 2s. Then I turned and walked out. As I walked toward conference room 4C, I couldn't help but feel a pang of bitter nostalgia. I passed the mural the CEO had commissioned after our Series D funding closed. It was a grotesque, backlit monstrosity of innovation. It depicted a diverse group of stock photo models wearing VR goggles and pointing at a digital horizon. Funny, he never included the women who actually closed the deal. He never included me, or Sarah from legal, or the analysts who crunched numbers until their eyes bled. Just empty faces for an empty culture. I had given this company everything. When the market crashed 3 years ago, I voluntarily took a 20% pay cut to avoid layoffs in my department. When Brian, the current CEO, was just a stumbling VP of marketing who couldn't tell a balance sheet from a takeout menu, I was the one who stayed late to fix his presentations. I ghost-wrote his speeches. I smoothed over his gaffes with investors. Brian. He wasn't in the conference room when I arrived. Of course he wasn't. Brian was the kind of man who believed conflict was beneath his pay grade. He was a creature of nepotism and polished charm, a man with a boyish, Botoxed face and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He preferred to let others swing the axe while he sat in his corner office, drinking espresso and pretending to be a visionary. He was likely hiding right now, probably checking his stock portfolio, waiting for the unpleasantness to be over so he could claim my bonus as cost savings for the quarter. The blinds to conference room 4C were already drawn. I opened the door and stepped inside. The atmosphere was sterile, cold, and smelled faintly of nervous sweat. Karen was sitting stiffly at the head of the table. Flanking her were two HR representatives I vaguely recognized, young, terrified, and looking like they had just dry-swallowed a handful of thumbtacks. There was no laptop in sight, no pitcher of water, no printed performance reports, no metrics to discuss, just the guillotine waiting for its cue. "Victoria," Karen said, offering a grimace that was trying desperately to pass as empathy. She gestured to the empty chair opposite her. "Thanks for joining us on such short notice." "Of course," I said, my voice steady. "I always make time for my team." Nobody smiled. The air in the room was so thick you could have carved it. I didn't sit immediately. I took a moment to place my leather portfolio and the table, aligning it perfectly with the edge. Then I sat. There was a single sheet of paper in front of Karen. It was typed, face down. I would have bet my entire 401k that it was my termination notice. Karen cleared her throat. It was a wet, nervous sound. She shifted in her seat, unable to meet my gaze directly. She looked at my chin, then my shoulder, then the wall behind me. "So, I'll just get right to it," Karen began, her voice trembling slightly. "We're undergoing a significant restructuring. As part of a strategic realignment approved by the board, we are eliminating several senior positions to optimize our operational efficiency." She paused, waiting for me to react. I didn't. I just blinked, my face a mask of polite interest. "Unfortunately," she continued, rushing the words now, "your position is being eliminated, effective immediately. This decision is final and has been approved by leadership." Leadership. She meant Brian. Brian, who was currently hiding. Brian, who I knew for a fact had just bought a vacation home in Aspen that he couldn't afford without a significant boost to the bottom line. "I see," I said. Karen blinked, surprised. She had expected a fight. She had expected tears, a scream, maybe a plea for reasons. She was prepared for an emotional outburst, armed with tissues and platitudes. "I'll need your badge," she added, her voice dropping to a whisper, almost apologetic. "And your company devices." I reached into my purse, unclipped my badge, and slid it across the table. It made a harsh scraping sound against the wood. "Understood," I said. We have a security officer waiting to escort you to your desk to collect your personal effects." One of the HR reps piped up, his voice cracking. "That won't be necessary," I said calmly. "I traveled light today." Karen looked relieved. Poor thing. She thought the hard part was over. She thought she had won. She didn't know me at all. What Karen didn't realize, what none of them seemed to grasp, was that firing me today, exactly one day before my 5-year executive bonus vested, didn't save the money. They thought they were being clever. They thought they were cutting a loose end before it became expensive. But by firing me without cause, without a performance improvement plan, and without a single documented disciplinary action, they hadn't voided the payout. They had triggered it. I looked at the portfolio sitting on the table. Inside was Clause 11C, and inside Clause 11C was a provision that stated if I were terminated without cause within 24 hours of a vesting event, the company didn't just owe me the $4 million. They owed me double, plus damages. "Is there anything else?" I asked, standing up. Karen shook her head, looking like she wanted to collapse from relief. No, that's all. We'll mail you the Cobra information." "Thank you, Karen," I said. "You've been very thorough." I picked up my portfolio, turned, and walked out of the room. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently, with a soft click. The war had just begun, and they didn't even know they were already under siege. I left conference room 4C like I was headed to a casual lunch. My stride was even, my breathing controlled. I held the pink slip, the white sheet of heavy bond paper, in my hand like it was a meaningless receipt for a sandwich I hadn't enjoyed. Karen stayed behind in the room. I could feel her eyes boring into my back through the frosted glass, probably sweating through her silk blazer, praying to whatever corporate gods she worshipped that I wouldn't make a scene in the hallway. The HR reps didn't follow me. They just sat there, frozen like mannequins in a discount suit showroom, waiting for their next restructure appointment. I passed my own office and didn't even glance at it. They would box my things for me, or they'd toss them in the supply closet and pretend they never knew I was here. That's how this game works. You don't build empires, you get rented by them. Then you are discarded the second your value outpaces your obedience. But what Karen and Brian especially never understood was that I never played by their rules. I just let them think I did. Instead of heading for the elevators that would take me down to the parking garage, the walk of shame they were banking on, I turned left. I swiped my badge at the secure door for the executive lift. It still worked. Of course it did. It wouldn't scrub my access until noon. I stepped inside and punched the button for floor 45, legal and compliance. The air on the 45th floor was different. It smelled of printer toner, burnt ambition, and expensive cologne. It smelled like dreams that had been laminated and filed away next to compliance manuals nobody reads until they get subpoenaed. I'd spent enough time up here during the Hastings deal to know who still had a soul behind their NDA-stamped eyes. The receptionist, a stern woman named Gladys W.H. O had been there since the founding, barely looked up until I dropped my leather folder onto her high counter desk with a heavy thud. "Tell Aaron Patel I'm here," I said. Gladys blinked, peering over her reading glasses. "Ms. Owens, do you have an appointment? Mr. Patel is preparing for the midday briefing." "I just got fired, Gladys," I said with a bright, terrifying smile. "Trust me, he'll want to see me." Her eyes widened slightly. She didn't ask questions. She simply picked up the receiver, whispered 3 words, and then nodded to the hallway. Door 3. Aaron was an assistant counsel who used to shadow me during the chaotic merger negotiations back in 21. He was a smart kid, sharp as a tack, but plagued by a conscience, a fatal flaw in this building. He once asked me over drinks if he should go to the private sector or stay and rot in corporate. I told him to stay just long enough to know where the bodies are buried and who held the shovels. 10 minutes later, I was in his office. He closed the door behind us and gave me that same deer-in-headlights look I'd seen in the mirror the day I found out Brian got the CEO role, after I practically built the pipeline he was now strutting around on. "Victoria, you okay?" he asked, leaning against his desk, arms crossed defensively. "Gladys said. She said they let you go." "Effective immediately," I confirmed, taking a seat without being asked. "No cause cited, no severance beyond standard, no mention of the incentive clause." His brow furrowed. "Which clause?" I opened the folder, flipped to page 7, and handed it to him. "Clause 11C, paragraph 3, subsection A." He took the paper, scanning it. He read it once, then again, then a third time much slower. His face didn't change at first, lawyers are good at that, but his eyes sharpened like a camera lens snapping into focus. "Did you add this during your Q4 renegotiation?" he asked, his voice hushed. "They initialed every page, Aaron. Brian even asked me what the multiplier line meant. I told him it was to cover transitional risk if I left. He shrugged and signed it because he was too busy trying to order lunch." Aaron sat back in his chair, exhaling a breath he seemed to have been holding since I walked in. "Victoria, this clause is airtight. If they fired you within 24 hours of vesting, they owe you the full bonus, plus 50% of your final year's base, plus damages if contested in arbitration." "Correct," I said. "And it wasn't just Brian. Karen knew. She signed the implementation memo last December. I have the PDF with her metadata on the drive, time-stamped, notarized, backed up. 3 copies. Aaron let out a soft, horrified laugh. He ran a hand through his hair. "They thought they could short-circuit the payout by axing you a day early. They think termination voids the obligation. But the clause, Jesus, the clause activates because of the termination." Precisely. This is going to melt faces upstairs, he muttered, looking at the ceiling as if he could see the executive suite burning through the drywall. I'm not here for revenge, Aaron, I said, leaning forward. I'm here for enforcement, he finished for me, nodding slowly. You want this escalated to lead counsel. I'd prefer if it came from you, I said softly. At least at first. You've got relationships I don't, and I'd rather the collapse happen from the inside out, not via some LinkedIn spectacle. Start the paper trail. Aaron didn't say much after that. He just took his phone, snapped a high-res photo of the page, scanned my folder into his secure system, and emailed himself the annotated packet. As I stood to leave, I paused at the door. Don't worry about being on the wrong side of this, Aaron. The wrong side was the one that thought I'd roll over. Outside his office, I didn't head to the garage. Not yet. I needed to make one more stop to ensure the trap was fully primed. I walked past the framed photos of past general counsels, all square-jawed men with glassy eyes and $1,000 suits, and headed toward the compliance bullpens. I found Sarah sitting exactly where I hoped she'd be, hunched over her dual monitors in a cubicle too small for the amount of institutional knowledge she carried. Sarah was the type who remembered everything. Case law, birthdays, the name of my cat, the specific dietary restrictions of the board chairman. She was also the first intern I ever mentored, back when she still used sticky notes instead of citation software and believed HR actually protected employees. Now, 5 years in, she knew better, and I was about to give her a front row seat to exactly why. She looked up startled as my shadow fell across her desk. Victoria, what are you? Didn't I just hear? You did, I said, cutting off the rumor mill before it could spin. I placed a second folder, a duplicate I had prepared, onto her desk. Clause 11C, annotated. Original contract addendums, Cigna. Tur errata, arbitration triggers. Also includes 3 backup references to the equity schedule Brian approved in Q4. She blinked, confused. Wait, are you terminated? Effective immediately, no cause cited, 1 day before vesting. The clock resets as of noon today. Sarah opened the folder slowly, treating it like it might detonate. She scanned the first page. Did Karen sign off on this? She did, page 6 of the implementation memo. DocuSign from her iPad, timestamps in the margin. Jesus, Sarah whispered. Clause activates upon involuntary termination without cause within 24 hours of any major equity event, including scheduled vesting. I didn't hide it, Sarah, I highlighted it. Brian laughed and said, only lawyers read the fine print. Sarah was already on page 3 when she stopped. She blinked. Read the paragraph again. Her mouth opened like she was about to speak, but the words got lost somewhere between her gut and her ethics. This clause, she stammered. Yes, I said. It triggers an accelerated payout equal to 2 times the equity value, plus base, plus benefits continuation, plus indemnity provisions if they try to stonewall. Victoria, this is delicious, she whispered, looking up at me, both horrified and impressed. They thought they were being clever, I said, keeping my voice low. They thought I wouldn't notice a last-minute firing with no severance discussion, no legal presence, no memo from compliance. They thought wrong. Sarah glanced nervously toward the hallway. Does Aaron know? He does. He's escalating to lead counsel quietly. But I figured it wouldn't hurt if someone else started pulling the red thread, too. She nodded, still absorbing it like her brain had just walked face-first into a rake. Clause 11, see this language. It's surgical. Who wrote this? I did, I said. While recovering from pneumonia 3 years ago, signed it in a hospital gown with an IV in my arm. That's how far ahead I was playing. She shook her head, grinning despite herself. You might want to run this up the ladder, she said, holding the folder like it was radioactive. I leaned in a little closer, resting my hand on her cubicle wall. Sarah, this is one of those moments that defines you. You can flag it and pretend it's someone else's problem, or you can own it. Be the one who saw the fire coming and sounded the alarm. She didn't speak, but I saw the resolve slide into her posture like a metal rod. She sat up straighter. "I'll take it to Meredith," she said. "Right now." "Good." As I turned to leave, she asked, "What if they try to bury it?" "They can try," I said, pausing. "But it's already backed up in 3 places with timestamps. One copy in Aaron's hands, one in my personal legal archive, and one—" I tapped my phone, "in a drive labeled Brian's gift basket that automatically emails the full packet to the board of directors if anyone modifies my employment record without a matching clause tag." Sarah's jaw dropped. "Are you serious?" I smiled. They like to pretend I'm just a file folder in heels. I let them. It's amazing what you can build in the dark if no one bothers to watch you closely. I walked out of legal like I owned the floor. Not a single person stopped me. Not one raised a hand or asked where I was going. That's the thing about quiet exits. People assume you've accepted defeat. But that morning, I wasn't leaving the building broken. I was leaving it booby-trapped. And someone had just tripped the wire. I didn't go home. Going home is what victims do. They go home, they cry, they drink cheap wine, and they wonder where it all went wrong. I went to a cafe 4 blocks from Arcshire headquarters, one of those third-wave coffee shops where the chairs were reclaimed wood and the espresso cost more than minimum wage. It wasn't about the coffee. It was about the Wi-Fi and the line of sight to the revolving doors of my former office building. I sat at a corner table, opened my laptop, my personal one, naturally, and waited. It didn't take long. At 10:41 a.m., barely 40 minutes after I left Sarah's desk, my phone buzzed. From Meredith Leyu, Lead Board Counsel, subject. Clause 11C/termination, file priority. Highest. Victoria, we are currently reviewing your termination file and the contract addendums brought to our attention by compliance. Your annotated documentation has been received. Timestamp confirms delivery. Will advise shortly. No apology, no flattery, just cold, clipped legalese, the kind that meant they realized they hadn't just stepped in it, they were drowning in it. I smiled, took a sip of my latte, and opened my encrypted backup app. Meanwhile, inside the glass tower down the street, the chaos was beginning to bloom. I didn't need to be there to see it. I had spies. My phone buzzed again, a text from Sarah. "Sarah, Meredith just stormed into the HR war room. She looks like she's about to murder. Someone, Karen, is hyperventilating. They are looking for cause documentation. Do they have any?" I typed back, not a scrap. I've never had a write-up in 12 years. "Sarah, they are panicking. Brian just got pulled out of a strategy meeting. He's claiming he never saw the clause." I chuckled, of course he was, the denial phase. I decided it was time to turn the screw. I didn't want them just panicked, I wanted them paralyzed. I opened my email client and composed a new message. I attached a single video file, a screen recording from the Zoom meeting where the final equity plan was approved 3 years ago. To Meredith Leyu CC, Aaron Patel, Sarah Clark subject, Ray, Clause 11C/contextual evidence. Meredith. Regarding the review of my contract, please find attached the recording of the Q422 Compensation Committee meeting. Timestamp 14:02. Brian Stevenson. Yeah, whatever legal wants. Just get her to stay through year-end. If she wants a parachute, give it to her. We'll cross that bridge if we ever burn it. I believe this clarifies the intent and awareness of the leadership team regarding the clause in question. Regards, Victoria. I hit send. Almost immediately, the read receipt notifications started pinging. One from Meredith, one from Aaron. Then, the internal forward notifications, Meredith forwarding to Brian, Meredith forwarding to the board chair. I could picture it perfectly. Meredith sliding her laptop across the glossy conference table. Brian watching his own face on the screen, listening to his own arrogant voice dismiss the very legal weapon that was now about to decapitate his career. A moment later, a new email arrived. This one wasn't from legal, it was from Karen. From Karen Miller, VP HR. Subject: urgent, please call me. Victoria, there has been a significant misunderstanding regarding the nature of your departure today. We need to discuss the restructuring terms. Please call me immediately so we can correct the paperwork. Correct the paperwork, she said, as if she could simply hit undo on a termination that had already triggered a multi-million-dollar liability. I didn't reply. I let the phone vibrate on the table, watching the name Karen Miller flash and fade, flash and fade. They were scrambling now. They were realizing that the investigation wasn't going to dig up dirt on me, it was going to bury them. Every document they pulled, every email they unarchived, only confirmed two things. I was excellent at my job, and they had fired me purely to cheat me out of my earnings. My phone buzzed a third time. From Meredith Leyu. Subject: arbitration notice. Victoria, in light of the documentation provided, Arcshire Financial is prepared to enter immediate arbitration to discuss a settlement regarding the Clause 11C trigger. Please confirm your counsel's availability for tomorrow morning. I stared at the word arbitration. They were still trying to contain it. They wanted a quiet room, a non-disclosure agreement, and a check that was big enough to shut me up but small enough to save Brian's bonus. But they had forgotten to read the last paragraph of Clause 11C. I typed my reply. Meredith, per Clause 11C, subsection D. In the event of constructive or involuntary termination without cause, the employee retains sole discretion to waive arbitration and proceed directly to litigation or board review. I am exercising that discretion. I decline arbitration. I will await the board's decision regarding the full payout, or, if you prefer, we can discuss it in court. I have plenty of time. I'm currently unemployed. I pressed send and watched the little blue bar zip across the screen. The cafe was noisy, coffee grinders whirring, hipsters discussing startups, but in my head there was only silence. The heavy, suffocating silence of a boardroom where the most powerful people in the company had just realized they were holding a grenade, and I had just thrown away the pin. The call for the final showdown didn't come in the form of a summons to a dark alley or a courtroom. It came via a calendar invite sent to the entire executive leadership team, which Sarah promptly forwarded to me with a single subject line: "It's happening." I wasn't in the room physically. I didn't need to be. I had ghost-wrote the script they were reading from, and my actors, Aaron and Sarah, were giving me the play-by-play in real time. But years later, David Halpern, the board member who eventually recruited me, filled in the gaps. He described the scene with such vivid clarity that I can see it now, like a film reel playing behind my eyelids. Let me take you inside the executive suite of Arcshire Financial, roughly 4 hours after I walked out. The room was dead silent. Unnaturally so. It was the kind of silence you only get after the last champagne bottle has been emptied and someone finally notices the curtains are on fire. Everyone who mattered had been summoned. There was no agenda, no coffee s. Irvis, no polite small talk. It was a leadership sink that smelled more like an autopsy. Brian sat at the head of the table, his usually pristine jaw set tight, arms crossed over his chest like a petulant teenager sent to the principal's office. To his left sat Karen, visibly trembling. In front of her was a yellow legal pad with nothing written on it but the word defensible scrawled 3 times in shaky handwriting. The CFO was ghost pale, rubbing his temples, and the head of operations looked like she was mentally updating her LinkedIn profile. And standing at the head of the table, commanding the room like a gladiator in a pencil skirt, was Meredith Leyu. Meredith wasn't wearing her usual courtroom smile or her corporate charm lipstick. She was wearing war paint, subtle but unmistakable. She dropped a thick packet of documents onto the mahogany table. The sound cracked through the room like a gavel strike. "Let's get one thing straight," Meredith began, her voice low and dangerous. "This isn't a miscommunication. It's not an HR oversight. This is a ticking liability with a lit fuse that we lit ourselves. Brian leaned back, trying to summon that effortless arrogance that had failed him so spectacularly all day. Look, Meredith, we know she's making noise. Victoria has always been dramatic. She's bluffing. She is not bluffing, Meredith snapped, her voice rising just enough to make Brian flinch. And this isn't drama, Brian. This is contractual suicide. She opened the folder and pulled out a single page, sliding it across the table with lethal precision. It stopped right in front of Karen. Page 6 of the Q4 amendment, Meredith said. Is that your signature? Karen stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. She didn't look up. I didn't read every line of the appendix. We were rushing to finalize the head count. You initialed every line, Meredith cut in, her finger stabbing the paper. And so did Brian. You both signed off on Clause 11C, including the activation multiplier language, the vesting window clause, and the constructive termination trigger. Constructive termination? Brian repeated, his brow furrowing. That's ridiculous. We fired her. That's standard termination. Constructive termination, Meredith corrected, enunciating every syllable, means you fired her under circumstances designed to avoid paying a contractual obligation, which, in the eyes of the law, is indistinguishable from fraud. Karen paled, her voice shrinking to a whisper. But we fired her for restructuring. We didn't mention the bonus. We kept it clean. That is precisely the problem. Meredith slammed her hand on the table. There is no cause documented, no performance flags, no disciplinary notes, no redundancy justification filed with HR. You walked a top-performing executive out of the building 23 hours before a scheduled equity vest without reason, and you thought that would void her bonus. She looked around the room, making eye contact with every terrified executive. What you actually did, she continued, was activate every financial protection she embedded in that clause. You didn't disarm the bomb, Brian. You hit the detonator. One of the committee members, a man who hadn't spoken yet, cleared his throat nervously. Is it enforceable? Beyond enforceable, Meredith said. She has timestamps, backups, email trails, metadata. Her termination was filed internally 37 minutes after she submitted her clause notification to legal and compliance. That creates an irrefutable presumption of retaliation. Brian muttered something under his breath and pushed his chair back, as if preparing to leave. Sit down, Meredith commanded. He froze. He had never heard her speak to him like that. He sat. Meredith walked slowly to the large touchscreen display at the head of the room. She tapped a command, bringing up a scanned document. She zoomed in on a specific paragraph. Clause 11C, in the event of involuntary or constructive termination within 24 hours preceding a scheduled equity vesting event, the subject shall be entitled to full vesting acceleration, immediate payout at current market value, and additional compensation calculated at 1.5x base salary. The room let out a collective, horrified groan. Who the hell approved that clause? Someone whispered. Meredith tapped the screen again. A signature line filled the display. Lawrence Drayton, board chair. Brian's eyes went wide. Wait, Lawrence signed that. He did, Meredith said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. Back in 2019, before we closed Series B, Victoria wrote the clause as retention insurance. Lawrence agreed it was fair given her role in structuring our early compliance infrastructure. It sat untouched for 3 years, and now, because of your arrogance, it is about to cost us the GDP of a small nation. Why didn't we catch it? Karen whimpered. Because you never read the fine print, Meredith said, staring at Brian. You were too focused on the headlines. Meanwhile, Victoria was writing her escape plan in plain sight, in ink, with your initials. The CFO finally spoke up, his voice grim. So, what's the damage? Standard payout was $4 million. If we settle, maybe we can knock it down to 3. Meredith turned to him, her expression pitying. Tell him, Tom. The CFO looked down at his calculator. With the equity recalculations, the performance triggers, and the 1.5x multiplier. Multiplier, Karen squeaked. It's not 4 million, the CFO said, his voice hollowing out. It's 6.5 million, and that's before damages. Brian slumped back in his chair, looking like he had been hit with a sledgehammer. 6.5. She also submitted the meeting transcript from the Q4 session where you dismissed her clause concerns on record, Meredith added, delivering the coup de grace. She has you on video, Brian, laughing about it. Silence fell again, heavier this time, the kind of silence you feel in your teeth. Then the heavy oak doors opened. The board secretary stepped in. She looked pale. Apologies for the interruption, she said, her voice trembling. The chair is requesting your presence, all of you, immediately. Meredith didn't move to gather her things. She just looked at Brian one last time. This wasn't a mistake, Brian, she said softly. It was a masterclass, and you failed every single test. The call came just after noon the following day. I was sitting in the rooftop garden of my condo building, overlooking the Austin skyline. The cranes and glass towers glittered in the sun, a monument to ambition and steel. I was barefoot, wearing a silk robe that cost more than my first car, holding a glass of iced tea that was sweating in the heat. My phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew the area code. It was the direct line from the boardroom. I answered on the second ring, calm as the water in the pool beside me. Victoria Owens. Victoria, the voice said. It was cool, composed, but frayed around the edges. It's David Halpern. From the board, I smiled faintly. David had once offered me a position at a rival firm, discreetly, of course. He respected the game. David, I said warmly, to what do I owe the pleasure? I'll get right to it, he said. He sounded tired. Did you intend to trigger Clause 11C? I didn't blink. They terminated me, David. I simply made sure I left a paper trail. A silence, thick and thoughtful, hung between us. I've read the clause, he said finally. The annotations, your timestamps. Frankly, Victoria, it's one of the cleanest risk shields I've ever seen embedded in an incentive package. I had good mentors, I replied. Some of them on your board. He chuckled under his breath. It wasn't a happy laugh, but it was one of admiration. Brian is still insisting it was an oversight. I'm sure he is. And Karen is claiming she never understood the multiplier. She understood enough to sign it twice, I said, my voice hardening slightly. And that memo she sent on December 14th, I flagged the language in bold. Her initials are in the margin. I assume Meredith showed you that. She did, David sighed. Christ. There was a pause, and I heard the muffled sound of papers shuffling on his end. Our CFO just confirmed the numbers, David said. Because of the clause's reference to unvested equity and the 1.5x multiplier, your payout is substantial. We are prepared to wire the full amount. $6,586,250. And 0 cents, I added. And 0 cents, he conceded. We are sending the settlement agreement over now. It includes a standard NDA regarding the specific internal failures that led to this point. I imagine it does, I said. I'll sign it. My quarrel isn't with the shareholders, David. It was with the management. About that, David said, his voice dropping lower. You'll be pleased to know the board has taken immediate corrective action. Karen has resigned to pursue new opportunities, effective this morning. And Brian, I asked. Brian is being reassigned, David said, choosing his words carefully. He will be leading a new innovation initiative in a department that currently has no budget, no staff, and an office in the basement of our satellite building. Exile, they hadn't fired him, that would admit fault, but they had gelded him. He would spend the rest of his contract staring at a wall, knowing he had been outplayed by the woman he thought he could discard. I appreciate the update, David, I said. Victoria, he said before hanging up, you always struck me as too composed for this business, too methodical, but watching this unfold, I realize now that you weren't calm because you lacked fire. You were calm because you knew where every fuse was buried. That's why they hired me, I said, and why they never should have fired me. The line went dead. Minutes later, the email arrived. Subject, settlement package, ARCTURE financial attachment. Final settlement agreement, PDF payment confirmation, $6,586,250. I didn't open the NDA immediately. I just stared at the number. The damage was done. My old company hadn't even managed to spin it. No press release. No bold new direction. Just a quiet, expensive purge. I didn't return any of the voicemails that followed. Not Meredith's request for a debrief. Not Sarah's congratulatory text, though I did send her a bottle of Dom Perignon later, and certainly not the frantic missed calls from Brian's personal cell. I was too busy. I had a meeting in an hour with the executive team at Westridge Capital. They had flown me in after hearing whispers about how I sank a CEO with a single clause. They weren't hiring me for a role. They were offering me a seat at the table partner track, strategy division, autonomy, equity. But for this moment, I wasn't thinking about the next deal. I was thinking about punctuation. I sat down on the lounger, kicked my feet up, and snapped a photo of the skyline with my iced tea in the foreground. I opened my texts and scrolled until I found the last saved number from my Arcshire days. The board chair, Lawrence Drayton. I typed one sentence, Clause 11C, line 22. Then I attached the photo and hit send. Line 22, if anyone had forgotten, was the clause's closing statement. I had written it myself, late one night with a bottle of wine and a fever. Failure to honor the terms herein shall constitute not only breach, but a systemic lapse in judgment subject to restitution, review, and reputational consequence. They had initialed it. Brian had even chuckled at the legalese. Now, that sentence had played out like a prophecy. I watched the delivered status appear. I took a sip of my drink. For the first time in years, I felt it. Not revenge, not satisfaction, not even victory. Just clarity. I hadn't burned the bridge. I'd walked across it, detonated the pillars, and charged them rent for the rubble.